Hey folks, how's it going? Dr. Spin. Eclectic album reviews and general musical meanderings. Welcome to the final installment of my Tier 2 Roundup series for 2025. Tier 2 encapsulates all of the albums I've been listening to since the beginning of this spring season. And of course, this last one is what I've been listening to for the past month or so. There's a lot of really fantastic albums in this particular set, so let's go and get started with Ghost, Skeleta. Year before last, I got into Ghost through their album Meliora, which is a really fantastic hard rock album, and even though I've had some resistance to them due to the way that they play with identity, I really got into that album a lot. You can't deny the fact that Ghost writes amazing songs with a lot of care and a lot of personality. I mean, as much as they invest time and energy in their music, they also have this whole thing with their identity where they play with lore. There's a whole history that goes on with the various incarnations of the band. And I wonder sometimes if there's actually fan fiction that goes along with this. Anybody written fan fiction on this? I don't know. On the various lead singers that go up. So this is the most recent iteration of Ghost. In this particular version, I think they're playing down a lot of the heavy metal aspects of their sound and kind of going more for a hard rock AOR sound. I kind of jokingly have been telling people that Skeleta sounds kind of like what would happen if Bo Burnham sang for Asia. And although that seems like it might be a little bit of an insult, it's really not intended to be such. I have a lot of respect for Bo Burnham's musical side, and clearly, as a fan of progressive rock and a fan of men from the 80s, I really love Asia. And yes, they still have this sort of satanic imagery, and I think it's one of those things that kind of can set people ill at ease about them. But I also think that, as a band that's coming from Sweden, the stakes are a little bit different. The socio-cultural stakes are a little bit different when you start talking about this sort of imagery. I mean, Swedish death metal is, nothing to be joked about when you start talking about dark imagery. So for them to play with it in kind of such an offhanded fashion, I think in the US we might have more problems with that. But coming from that area of Europe, I don't think it's really meant to be as heavy-handed as it is. But at the same time, there's a lot invested in that. Sometimes you have to wonder how much Tobias Forge, the lead guy from Ghost, is really kidding around how much he's not. I think it comes off more like redemption, more like he's trying to be asked to be saved from these evil forces that are aligning against him. That wasn't the case with Meliora. It felt more like solidarity with evil forces. And I think that on this album, that's downplayed a little bit. Next up I got Death's Dynamic Shroud's Midnight Tangerine. And it would seem from the title of this band that this is another kind of dark group. But really, Death's Dynamic Shroud, generally speaking, doesn't live up to the name, the dark themes that their name might suggest. They're actually a top-tier electronic music outfit that releases albums at an unbelievably fast rate, and also with an unbelievably high quality. Everything I've ever gotten from them really blows me away in terms of its quality and its diversity. This particular album is part of a trilogy of albums that were released in 2023, which included Transcendence Bot and Keys to the Gate, both of which I've been listening to for the past year on and off. And my understanding from the reviews that I saw that this one was kind of like the least compelling of the three. But to be frank, I think this is my favorite one of the three so far. Whereas I think Transcendence Bot was a lot about industrial and cyberpunk themes, and Keys to the Gate was a little bit more synth pop. This one feels a little bit more cinematic. If there's any one of their albums that really sounds mostly like M83, it's this one. It comes off as the most introspective and textural of the three, and the one I think that has the most standard songwriting on it. And each one of the Death Dynamic Shroud albums that I've had so far has had really standout songs on it. I think all the songs in this one are particularly fantastic, but I really appreciate the pensive tension of the opening track, What I Say I Am. The video that they have for this is just an electronic video game of playing chess, but it's almost magical the way that the song kind of captures the tension of the game as it unfolds.
As a queen is a pawn, as a quest is a con. I'm not good, I'm not bad, but I'm not who I say I am.
Okay, next up I got Mount Eerie's Night Palace. Well, this is my first experience with Mount Eerie, but this is a project that has a very long history. I think this is their 11th album under this name. And it really stylistically runs very counter to a lot of the things I've been listening to this season, which is one of the things I find really attractive about it. Whereas I've been really invested in high-end production and melody a lot this year. This one has production value of its own. It's very, I think, unique, but it presents itself in a very intimate and almost improvised way. The songs sort of shamble along with this Tom Waitsy feel, but kind of comes off a lot like stripped down late 60s psychedelia. But there's not a whole lot of very clear melody on this. This is one of the things that makes it feel kind of improvised and certainly intimate, where it just feels like it's sort of talking, singing. The melody isn't super strong, but it's led by these lyrics that are very inspired by nature, and his investment in them really feels like he's just speaking offhandedly to his environment around him, singing these songs that are about relationships with the trees and birds and the sea. It almost feels like if there is such a thing as post-punk folk, this would fit into that category. And although it does come off as very intimate and very almost like offhanded, it does have some really well thought out production value to it, almost like what Low was doing towards the end of their career. Every song has a surprise where it starts off with maybe just some guitar lines, and then there's sort of like this huge explosion of drone worship, or he's sitting by the sea and talking to whales, and in the middle of the song it just goes off into this 1.5-minute white noise. It sounds like just the sea, and it fits the song so perfectly. It doesn't get in the way at all. It helps to actually, in a weird way, propel it along, even though it causes you to stop and take pause. And also to understand that the album is slightly inspired by Zen Buddhism, and I think that the feel of the album kind of plays that out as well, because it has that sort of experiential feel that maybe even late Talk Talk albums would have had. It's not really so much about the individual songs, it's about the experience of listening to the album. And it's a really great listen, and one that took me by surprise as to how deep it actually is.
Trailed by belongings, I crawl forward into a clearing dust. A huge fire going. It grew, and I fell, and I kept throwing whatever I could pick up into the flames.
Okay, next up I got Girlfriends and Boyfriends, A Fallacy of Fairness. Not too long ago, I was talking about the band Crownlands, and I had mentioned this idea, this concept I have of algorithm rock, which is a kind of music that really aligns itself so closely with a given style or a given band that it sounds like it would fit right in with it. If you were listening to a mix of a certain style of music on Spotify, this would be sort of next in line. And I think that Girlfriends and Boyfriends is a great example of algorithm rock. If you're a fan of 80s bands like The Cure and Duran Duran, they really mine the sounds and the feel of those bands in a very, very compelling way. And as a person who lived through the 80s and remembers the era of the Juno and the DX7, I really appreciate that about this album. The songwriting is pretty good, but I think what's most powerful about it is its nostalgic qualities. And maybe that might be lost on somebody who wasn't there for that time. But, for me, who really got into the sound of the brass stabs on View to a Kill, this album, I think, speaks to me personally because of my association with that time frame. Next up I got the Avalanches, We Will Always Love You. The third album in quite a long time, actually, from a critically acclaimed plunderphonics group, the Avalanches. And if you're not familiar with the term plunderphonics, it refers to a specific type of electronic music that uses samples but doesn't really try to mask what those samples are coming from. They're almost trying to use specific bits of music to call on the listener without messing with it, without changing the exact quality of what that thing is. Whereas, a group like Public Enemy would take samples and mix them up so much that you couldn't really understand what they were supposed to be in the first place. This is a situation where you can clearly hear where the sample is coming from. For example, the track Interstellar Love on this album has a very, very clear sample from Alan Parsons' project Eye in the Sky. And for those of us who are attached to those original versions of it, that can be a little bit of an annoyance, to be frank. But in this particular example, it plays out in such a way that it brings the feel of that song back in a sort of a reverential way. So it adds a little bit of a layer of feeling to this song that maybe wouldn't have been there otherwise. Beyond its reverent use of music of days gone by, it also carries with it some themes of like life and the afterlife and connections in between. So this sort of like the communication that the listener has with the music is very similar to what, you know, the narrator in the piece has with people who perhaps they were close to who are now passed on and living their existence out in whatever lies beyond. The album is also chock full of guest stars, and many times some that are oddly juxtaposed. Like, for example, there's a track on here where MGMT and Johnny Marr do collaborate. There's another song on here where Pink Sifu and Rivers Cuomo from Weezer collaborate. So many of these guest artists kind of show up from very different styles and collaborate on these songs in a way I think is pretty convincing. Finally, I got The Marvelous Three, the Hey album. This is a 1998 album from power pop group The Marvelous Three, and that's the best way that you can describe what this album is. It is a great, great example of late 90s power pop. And it carries all the hallmarks of that style. Driving wall of sound guitars, great melodicism, great vocal arrangements, and very aggressive, high energy playing. And like a lot of that late 90s power pop, it's very consistent across the board. If you like one of the songs in this album, all of them kind of fall into the same vein, which kind of ended up being one of the problems with that late 90s power pop. As I was into it back then, I had a really big jag when I was very into all of that style. But after a while, it kind of just starts to sound a little bit the same. And that's kind of the problem that you have with Marvelous 3 to a degree. They fit in that paradigm so clearly that it's really hard to break them out of it. And I also think this album itself shows the hallmarks of that time, because this is whenever record labels started signing bands but then not really promoting them. And I think Marvelous 3 was one of those bands that kind of fell into that, where they were putting all this energy into making an album and then they would release it, and then the record label would just kind of fizzle out on them. So there's like a whole bunch of energy poked into one song on this album, Freak of the Week, which I think is the one that if anybody's heard this band at all, it's probably that song. But even so, the standards and style that are presented in Freak of the Week, I think, persist throughout the album. And if you are in the mood for that late 90s power pop sound, this is the one for you.
All the clothes that I got, 'cause all the geeks that I meet, they all look cooler than me. But what to do when they're all looking at you? 'Cause you're the freak of the week, 'cause you're on the TV. Can you make me a promise? Something before we begin. Will you hold on to my hand if I ever lose it again?
And that's all I got for you guys this time around. So as we're closing up tier number 2, we're looking at tier 3. There are no new albums introduced in tier 3. All of tier 3 is just taking 24 albums that we've narrowed it down to, and narrowing it down even further to 12. So any video responses that I have related to tier 3 is going to be put out in the showdowns themselves in the form of shorts. So if you're on YouTube, you can see it in the shorts circuit. They're also going to be over on TikTok if you want to check them out over there. If you want to see when those are going to happen, please like and subscribe and share this video out with your friends. Also, follow me over on Spotify if you want to listen to all these tracks. All tier 1, all tier 2 is going to be up in there. Push play on it, push shuffle, listen to all this stuff that we've got going on. And if you want to be part of the showdown as it goes forward, it's not too late to sign up. Please sign up for my Patreon below. And until I see you next time, I'll catch you on the flip side.